Adela, can we start off with the roll call?
Yes. Cohen.
Here.
Mendoza.
Here.
Halpern.
Here.
Tanya Moody.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Chow.
Here.
Cartha.
Here. Anya, if you can do the approval here.
I move that the Board of Education approve tonight's meeting agenda as presented.
Second.
Cohen. Here. Okay. Mendoza.
Here. Or yes.
Yes.
Tanya Moody.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Yes.
Chow.
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. Again, thank you all for being here. The reason that we are here tonight is that after 5 years of dedicated service to the children of District 65 and the Evanston-Skokie communities, Superintendent Dr. Paul Gorin is resigning from District 65, effective as of July 1st, 2019. During Dr. Gorin's tenure, the district has reestablished a strong Office of Curriculum and Instruction, established school climate teams in every building, developed deep and lasting partnerships across the community, and has embraced and implemented a robust racial equity agenda that has included the training of over 1,100 staff members in racial identity awareness and how it applies to classroom and school practices. Both the board and Dr. Gorin agree that this is an opportune time to transition the leadership to build on the progress made over the past 5 years. Since assuming his position, Dr. Gorin and the board led the successful passage of the 2017 referendum and have successfully negotiated labor contracts with the 5 unions representing the district's employees. Most recently, Dr. Gorin and the board led bargaining processes with the Teachers Union and the Teachers Assistants Union using a collaborative, interest-based approach focused on building trust between staff and district leadership. This process led to the approval of 5-year contracts for both bargaining units before the end of the school year for the first time in decades. The board sincerely thanks Dr. Gorin for his 5 years of dedicated leadership, and we wish him all the best in his future endeavors. The board remains fully committed to the stated priorities of the district, including our strategic plan and equity agenda, and will continue to uphold these values as we plan next steps for the leadership of the district. Tonight, we will interview and select an executive search firm to help us find the right interim superintendent for the 2019-20 school year, one who can support our talented team of professionals in their ongoing work for the district, and who can ensure that we continue to keep forward progress for our students, particularly our students of color, at the center. The board's intention is to interview interim superintendent candidates over the summer and appoint an interim at our August 19th regular board meeting. The firm we select tonight will also help us conduct a search for a permanent superintendent for the 2020-21 school year and beyond. In the meantime, the board is extremely pleased to announce that Dr. Stacy Beardsley, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, has agreed temporarily to take on additional duties to act as our interim superintendent during the summer months, from July 1st to August 19th. Dr. Beardsley has led the district's Curriculum and Instruction Department since 2015 and is a highly valued member of our senior administration team. The board has full confidence in her ability to lead our district during these transitional months and to prepare us for the opening of schools in August, and we are committed to supporting her however we can. The board understands that the uncertainty raised by a change in leadership is bound to cause some discomfort and anxiety within our district and our community. We assure you that we are working hard to ensure a smooth leadership transition, and we intend to engage in a process that is transparent and inclusive of stakeholder voice to identify the next superintendent of District 65. So with that, Rebecca, you have
Yes,
the motion.
I move that the board approve the resignation agreement between Dr. Gorin and the board in substantially the form presented to the board and authorize the board president and secretary to execute and attest the agreement.
Second.
Mendoza.
Yes.
Halpern.
Yes.
Tanya Moody.
Yes.
Cohen. Hernandez.
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes. And then Joey
Item-
can...
Yeah, item 5. I move that the board approve the interim superintendent assignment agreement between Stacy Beardsley and the board in substantially the form presented to the board, and to authorize the board president and secretary to execute and attest the agreement.
Second.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Cohen, Hernandez,
Yes.
Chow,
Yes.
Cartha,
Yes.
and did she, I
Yeah.
wasn't sure.
Lindsay?
Is it on speaker?
Okay, well, I think I'm going to... Bye, Lindsay, I'm going to go hang up. Sorry. Okay, Lindsay could not join us for the meeting. She was stuck at work, but she wanted to participate in those votes, at least. We will move on then to presentations from search firms. The first of which will be Hazard, Young, Attia and Associates. So if you want to go ahead, do we have what we need to get?
We do have a short presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask that you stand at the podium and speak into the microphone so that
Yes.
people who are watching at home can
Thank you.
hear you?
No
Thank you.
problem at all. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Connie Collins, and I'm from Hazard, Young, Attia and Associates. And I would like to, on behalf of the firm, thank the board, as well as the community and the administration for inviting us here tonight. We are happy to be here and to discuss what we have to offer as a firm. So thank you so much. I'm going to introduce myself. I have served as a superintendent for 16 years. In one of the districts was Oak Park, District 97, where I was superintendent, and we were partners with Evanston with the Minority Student Achievement Network, and continued for many years in those endeavors to address the disparities between various groups of students. So I also am working with an Aspiring Superintendents Institute, where we're specifically focused on identifying superintendents for school districts across the nation of color, in particular because of the underrepresentation in our nation. So that is some of the work that I have done. I served as superintendent in Zion, as well as most recently superintendent in Round Lake, Illinois, and retired there in June of 2018. Pam?
Good evening. Thank you again for having us. My name is Dr. Pam Hollick, and I retired, it'll be 6 years as of at the end of this month, from the superintendency in Glenwood, Illinois. I spent my career predominantly in Illinois and started out as a high school teacher in mathematics and French, and spent 20 years on the North Shore as a teacher and an administrator, and retired. I started out in the northern suburbs and worked my way down to the south suburbs of Chicago. My final school district, I was superintendent for 8 years in a school district that changed over the course of time, from being predominantly white and middle class to some students who came from households with very few resources, and working with community groups and families and staff to bring resources to children. I'm glad to be back. I did work on your search for for Dr. Gorin 6 years ago, and am pleased to be here. Since I retired, I've been working with HYA in a variety of roles as their regional president for the firm, and also doing searches and strategic plans. Dr. Perdue is going to join us. We'll be a team of 3. He is returning to town tonight. He's probably at the airport right now and couldn't make it tonight, but Dr. Perdue has gone through 2 retirements, as superintendents. He retired from the state of Iowa about 15 years ago, and then came to Illinois as a superintendent and was in Glen Ellen, Illinois, and then joined the firm about 2 years ago. So he will be with us as well. And the reason, we normally are a team of two, but we are aware of the community involvement and high interest of your community and parents in conducting in community engagement, and we felt that we wanted to make sure that we had enough staff on hand to meet all of the needs when you get to the community engagement part, if you should choose us as your team. Let's see, I'm going to turn this over to you. I think this one's mine, yes. So why HYA? We're going to go through these quickly so we leave time for your questions. But we have a history of 30-plus years of doing searches in Illinois. The company did start on the North Shore of Chicago and was formed by a group of superintendents who felt that they had services and skills that they could offer to boards of education in finding their next leaders. We say that we have a national brand with a local focus. We do encourage you to do nationwide searches and cast your net as widely as possible so that you find the best possible candidate at this point in time for your needs. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily hire somebody from within, but it lets you see what the pool of candidates looks like. We've done lots of searches. I think it's actually more than 1,400 plus searches, and we have associates across the entire country. And we network with those associates in finding and actively recruit for your search.
We have what we call a signature search process, and it consists of 4 phases, and we're going to review briefly each of those phases for you. The first is the engage phase, which consists of an online survey which community members, staff, as well as board members, everyone in the community is encouraged to complete the survey so that we can find out what exactly are they looking for in the next superintendent, what do they believe are the strengths of the district and the opportunities in moving forward. In addition to the online survey, we conduct focus groups, and that's what Pam referred to earlier, where we come in and meet with groups that the board has identified as well as individuals in order to hear what they have to say about the school district and the direction that the district should move in. The recruit phase, as Pam indicated, we are a national firm, and so we're not only looking locally, but we go across the nation. And we are seeking the best candidates based on that leadership profile, which has been created from the information that we receive from the online survey and the focus groups. We're recruiting candidates, and also individuals are applying as they see the information on our website and through word of mouth about the school district.
If you look in your folder, there is a chart, and I'll just hold it up so you have a feel for what it looks like, about the 4 phases. And it's very helpful for you to have that as just an overview. It gives you a visual. So when you look at that, you'll see that the first 2 phases that Connie mentioned, we're doing the heavy lifting. That's our job, because you have a hard decision to make. So we don't want the process to be hard for you. That's why we're here. So you'll see that our boxes are wider. We have more to do, as we should. And then when you get to the select phase, your involvement becomes very important, as it should, because now we're bringing you information about candidates. Usually we have a slate of 5 to 7 candidates, and you also will have, through our board portal, the opportunity to see all of the applications. We do make those available to you. And we have discussions then about who should move forward in the process, and we stay with you through the entire process. At the bottom, it says facilitate third-party background checks. We encourage all boards of education to use a firm like Baker Eubanks to do a due diligence search. And one of the questions that often comes up is, couldn't I just have my 12-year-old do that and do a Google search? You could, but this is much more than that, and there is a little pamphlet in your folder about that. One of the examples that I like to use in a session like this is transcripts. Checking transcripts that, first of all, in this day and age of electronic degrees, for lack of a better way to put it, and that's not meant to be disparaging, that those universities really do exist, that the degrees that were earned, and that they're bona fide credentials. So those are some of the kind of services and that you have information and sources for before you make that final decision or sign a final contract. As far as then the transition phase, and I just mentioned that very, very briefly, one of the hallmarks of our firm is that we are not just a search firm. Our associates are also involved in strategic planning, and we offer other kinds of workshops for boards and new superintendents, or even just mentoring a new superintendent, being a shoulder to listen or another person to call. It's completely optional, but we are a full-service firm, and that's why we bring it up. The cost structure is outlined in your proposal. All of the fees are there. One thing that's important is the advertising. There are different packages that we can customize for you. So it is outlined on a one-page handout for you, and then we kind of can go from there and give you some advice about different organizations where you may want your search to be very visible or more or less. So we have some different advice for you in terms of that. The due diligence is also there that I just mentioned, as well as any transition services. But I want to spend a little bit of time on the tentative timeline. This was in your packet, I believe, and we didn't realize when we didn't have the information of when you wanted to appoint your superintendent, your interim superintendent. So we just went with early July to be on the safe side. But it shows you how aggressive that search will be for an interim superintendent. And we usually bring you 3 to 4 candidates, and depending on how much time you want that person to be on site. It may be a team of 2. It could be one person who's coming maybe a few days a week to make sure, because it's usually a retired superintendent who's doing that work and has to watch their number of days. So there are different ways to configure that, and we can talk about that as far as what that timeline looks like so that we meet your needs and for the August 19th. And it may be a person that you don't know well. It could be a local person, and you may not want to do a due diligence background search, or you may, and that takes about 10 days, 10 business days. So there's some time built in with that. It looks a little bit aggressive, but we did that to be on the safe side, so bear with us. And then the same thing with the tentative timeline. When we put this together, we made an assumption, just so that you could see what this looks like, that you would want to name your new superintendent before the holiday season or before winter break, giving you some time then to prepare for the next school year with your interim superintendent, your admin team, as well as the new person coming on board. So the engage phase could start right away as early as the middle of July, depending on your calendar. And then there are some very, very important activities that take place in that engaged phase, and we put some dates to that. And then the recruitment phase is a little bit of a dead zone for you because we're actively recruiting. Usually, if we brought you a slate of 5 candidates, 2 to 3 of those candidates are usually people that we recruited who would not have otherwise applied if we had not reached out to them. And then when we get to the select phase is where your time becomes very, very busy. And it's important to look at this with this particular timeline with an appointment date, or not necessarily an appointment date, but an offer date before your winter break, because Thanksgiving is embedded into that week. And frequently people are traveling. There are other things that are happening in the schools. So to do that, there's some self-sacrifice in terms of meeting those dates. And during the planning meeting that we conduct with you, we lay out all of this ahead of time so that you know the dates and where you need to be when, and what the time commitment will look like. And then the transition phase is something that would take place afterwards. We have a very strong guarantee. We want you to be completely satisfied. If we bring you a slate of 5, I'm just using 5 as a just a ballpark figure. But if we bring you 5 candidates and you don't like those candidates, we'll go get you some more. It might change our timeline, but we want you to be completely secure in your final decision for your next superintendent, because it's the best way to start. We want you to have the best start. If you're not, and something happens that a candidate or the board ends the employment of that individual, then we will redo the search for just expenses. We will not solicit your candidate or recruit your candidate for 3 years, unless you want us to. If it's a situation where maybe after 2 years, it's time for that person to move on, and you release that person from that time commitment, then that's up to you. But we will not be knocking on, we don't knock on the door of people that we place for at least 3 years. And then there is a price match as long as it's for a comparable level of services. The difference, these were certainly things that we covered, but I also added a few. I mentioned the nationwide network, that we have a strong team of support. Our headquarters is in Schaumburg, and there is a team there that assists all of our associates across the country, so they are local to us. And what I really enjoy is, I call them the kids, because they're young enough to be my kids anyway, and they're our tech team. So they're there to support getting the survey uploaded to if your tech team has questions, we can hand them off to people that understand what they're talking about and make sure that things are going smoothly. Our community engagement, we are known for our community engagement. We will be here for as long as it takes. I mentioned that's why we added a 3rd member to the team, because we want to reach out to all of your constituents to the fullest extent possible. And that means not just holding meetings here. That means pushing into their neighborhoods, different community centers, places of worship, whatever it takes is where we will go. And I also want to mention that because I worked on the search last time, we do not take anything for granted. Communities change. And so part of that is for us to find out what is the here and now, what are the needs of the community right now, and your parents and your business leaders, your Northwestern University certainly has an impact on this community. So reaching out to all of those individuals. Active recruiting is important to us. We're on the phone, we call people. Hey, have you thought about, we think you might be a fit for this, we'd like to talk to you more about it. And that's how that conversation starts. The strong guarantee, we stay with you from start to finish. And then I will also mention the report that we provide you with after the community engagement and the survey has closed. We write quite a comprehensive report on the trends that we saw. Is it scientific? No, it's who showed up. But you'll have a lot of people that show up, and we're aware of that, and hope that's what we always hope for. But what are the characteristics that your community would like to see in your next superintendent? And we always ask the same questions. We'll interview all of you individually as well. What's going well? What are some of the challenges facing your next leader for the next 3 to 5 years? What characteristics would you like to see in your next leader? And do you have any people that you would like us to reach out to? And we actually do call people and follow up on those calls. As long as it's not John Smith and, in downtown Chicago, we have to have a little bit of information to get there, don't we?
Yes.
But we do follow up on them. Connie, I didn't mean to rattle out.
No, you did
want to say
fine. You
anything?
covered everything.
Do you have questions? I hope you do.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and I'm sure that
We would love to be here again. We really would.
I guess I will just start off with, we are a community that has been, a community generally in our school district specifically, that has been doing a lot of work around racial equity in our community. So can you tell us what process, and you spoke a little bit to this, but what process you have in place to identify candidates who will be able to meet the needs of a racially and culturally diverse community? Can you specifically address, if we select your firm, what have your consultants done to deepen their own understanding of racial and cultural differences? And how do you determine a candidate's racial consciousness and their ability to understand issues of diversity and cultural differences?
Yeah. Well, as I indicated, I worked in Oak Park, so I'm very much aware, and they have very similar initiatives in place that you do here and very similar concerns. In addition to that, I've also served on the board of directors for the National Alliance of Black School Educators, and so really involved in that over the years. And in addition to that, really have interacted with a number of people where this is their passion. They want to go into school districts and look at districts where there is a need to close the equity as well as the achievement gap. And we look for individuals who have demonstrated that they have made this happen in the past in other positions that they've been in, so that this wouldn't be the first and we would just hope that they could do it, but they have demonstrated that this work has taken place.
It's also finding out what people's needs are, and it's a great question. I tell this story all the time, and it came from here and from the last search. I was meeting with some of your students, some of your 8th graders. I apologize, I don't remember which school it was at, but we were talking about open-ended questions, the same questions I asked kids, and when they got to challenges, they talked about race. And the quote from a young lady was, "Nobody ever asks us, and we live it every day. How do we get along with each other?" And it has stuck with me all these years. And so it's making sure that we get to the heart of how are people different, how are people the same, and then how do we meet those needs. Having worked with, I have not worked with huge groups of minority students or families, but the ones that I have worked with, and especially in Glenwood as their needs were changing, was how to reach out and help people. And being able to tell those stories. So when we interview candidates, it's not just about numbers on a page. They need to be able to tell us some very compelling stories that we can reach back when we're calling references and saying, tell us about this story. Did it really happen this way? Because it's the stories that stay with us, not just about, yes, I was in a school district that was predominantly African American, for instance. That's not enough. We need to hear their stories.
Yeah, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, so I just had a follow-up question, and I would like to, I guess, center in on not just racial and ethnic diversity, but racial justice via equity is, I think, the work that we've been trying to capture through policymaking and practices within the district. So the question I have is, how do you ensure that you're recruiting racially literate and a diverse pool of applicants? And I guess in that I'm asking, where are you looking to recruit those individuals? What are some of the screening tools or questions or practices that you use to ensure that a candidate is not approaching this work with a colorblind approach, but is actually seeking to create equity in education and justice through education?
I think, I would like to reiterate, what I said earlier regarding have they demonstrated it in any of the roles that they've been in, whether they were a superintendent in a school district, an assistant superintendent, or just in the work that they have done. So is it not that they're just talking about it, but is there evidence, and can others validate that did take place? And so once we do also the profile, get the leadership profile, and we know what the community as well as the staff is saying that they're looking for and what the priorities are, then that's what we really hone in on. And through the screening process that we do in order to identify the top candidates, we link it to the leadership profile and where you want that person to, what you want that person to cover as they're coming into the school district and what the priorities should be. So we start there, and then we move forward and we dig deeper into what their background is, what their experiences have been, and what their successes have been.
The other sometimes you have to get to questions through a backdoor approach as well, as probably the best way to ask. So if we ask candidates about social justice, we don't want textbook answers. That's a good start, but that's not enough. So I want to talk about student discipline. How do you handle student discipline in your school district? How have you grown as a disciplinarian, and what message do you convey as a leader to your school district about student discipline? And somehow social justice has to crop up in that conversation, whether they use that terminology or not. But it's how you treat people and and the message that you convey as a leader. I really do believe, and I believe Connie does as well, in a trickle-down approach in terms of what that message is and what we stand for as superintendents. It's a hard job. There's a lot of work involved, but there's a lot of presence as well. So we try to get to some of those issues, those compelling issues, by picking apart some of the meat of that question. And in my mind, one of those is student discipline. Are you an autocratic person who says, you broke a rule, go home for 3 days? Or how do you deal with that? And what are the options? Is fair for all mean the same thing? Is that identified as the same definition for every single student? Or is there a conversation in trying to work to help children grow from situations that they get, or poor decisions that they may have made?
Thank you. You talked a little bit about stakeholder engagement, and noting that our community is a community that is very, very engaged, but of course is also of varying opinions. So how do you, in a community that has diverse and sometimes divergent opinions, how do you set up stakeholder engagement sessions to be productive? What format do you recommend, and what questions or process do you use to elicit input?
We will interview individuals. Here again, the board assists us in making decisions about which groups should be together or which groups should be separate. So, and in some instances, there may be some key stakeholders where we need to hold individual meetings with them. As Pam indicated earlier, each of the board members we will interview individually. So you give us some direction in what this should look like and when it should occur and even where we need to go in order to do these interviews. So we take a look at, and if you know that there's some groups that may be small, et cetera, that we could work with them together and that people would feel comfortable in those environments, we take a look at that. If there are others that you feel that they should not be combined and we need to take a look at it differently, we do that. So we get some direction from the school board because you know your community very well, and so we rely on you for that information.
And I would also say that we're successful retired superintendents. And so we know how to run a meeting, but we have a format and we do stick to it. And occasionally we have to pull people back a little bit if they get off topic. But it is important that we hear their stories as well. So if somebody's hurting, they need to get that off their chest. Now, there are different ways of doing that, and sometimes we may have to meet with them. Sometimes it's in the parking lot, and we understand that, and that's part of it. We enjoy the community engagement piece, and it makes the survey richer in terms of the information that we're able to share with you, because we share quite a bit at the end. But they do need to get some things off their chest, and if somebody feels they've been treated unfairly, sometimes we have to say, the healing begins now. You know, you can't expect your new superintendent to come in and hit the ball running means different things to different people. It doesn't mean that something's going to be fixed immediately. So how do you get engaged, keep that person engaged in the process so that they still keep coming back, but you can get some meaningful work done as well. So we do try to, sometimes we'll say, no, this is not, we're not going to do it this way. We're going to stay on task, and we stay with the same 4 questions, and we do stick with those 4 questions. But some people will come back for multiple sessions, and they're welcome to do so. And that's okay. And we do try to if there are 2 groups that maybe are at loggerheads, then we'll have separate sessions for them. That's why we added an extra person.
I do want to open up for other questions, but I did have one other. The timeline that you presented is, I think, predicated on everything staying fairly closed in terms of the search process and interviews.
We're actually going to talk with you about that during the planning meeting, whether you want an open or closed search. and how closed is closed. We will, and it's not going to be a secret, we will tell you, come right out and say that we advise you to have a closed search. There have been, in some states, it's required to have a totally open search. And there was a school district down in Texas that was not a requirement, per their state laws, but they decided to have an open search in the interest of transparency, and nobody applied. So they basically started over again. It does impact the applicant pool, but there are ways to involve the community in the search process besides the community engagement. That's up to you. The community engagement is a fair amount of involvement, but if you feel you need to have something more, then we can make some suggestions about that.
For the benefit of the audience,
Yes.
folks listening, could you explain what a closed versus open search is?
I sure will. Open means, I'll start with open, because closed is the opposite, obviously. Open means that all applicant names are public. So you might get the slate, and you publish somehow what those names are. Interviews in Ohio must be conducted in open session in front of an audience, whoever wishes to come. All interviews, Florida as well, a couple other states. Decisions that you make are published as a board decision. There may be an interview team that interviews those applicants or finalists in open session, which is daunting. People will come right out and ask us, is it a closed search? That's the first thing they want to know, because somebody who is a sitting superintendent and is interested in this position and doesn't get the job has to go back to their school board and say, I really do love you better. They may be jeopardizing their own employment. So closed, meaning that there will be community engagement. The LPR results and survey results are presented in open session, but decisions that the board makes about who will be interviewed and who will move forward through the interview process is not published. It's kept confidential. And that's basically the difference.
I just sort of wanted to
Please
add,
add
as you
something.
talk about, just different levels of closed, between closed and open.
And there's everything in between.
Yes.
Yes.
And we just to give an example, I just finished the search in Freeport School District, and the board wanted to involve the community on the back end as well as, up front. And so therefore, they had community meet and greets of the 3 finalists who had been identified. So that was a chance for people to come out and to really meet the 3 finalists and to leave some feedback regarding those candidates. So that's one example of how the community can be involved at another level.
And I did one with another colleague. They also wanted the community to be involved on the back end. And it was difficult to choose about 30 people to come and participate in that, because then some feelings are hurt because you can't, it wasn't just an open session. So those individuals who were invited to do that interview, it was still kept confidential. They signed a confidentiality agreement for each candidate. They came for all 3 nights in a row, every single person. They were very dedicated, and they submitted their questions to us ahead of time, and we did it. We served as facilitators, and the community members were listening and then provided some feedback at the end that we provided to the board before those individuals went into their final interview. So there's lots of ways to do it. We can be, it's as imaginative as nothing's not possible. Nothing's impossible.
Does anybody have any other questions? I guess the last question I have then is, what other executive searches are you committed to during this time frame?
That's an easy one.
None. So this will be the only one. As I indicated, I just finished the search in Freeport. And so there is no other one that I'm involved in, and I think for all of us, that is the case.
True. And John and I just finished a search in April in Colorado Springs, and so we are committed to just working on a search at a time. So this would be our only project right now. We hope.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and we will hear the others and we will deliberate. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
I'm not sure where the thumb drive went,
I have it in my hand.
Oh, you've got it.
Yes.
Never mind. Thank you very much.
I just need to keep the work through Lindsay.
Yeah, I think we're probably okay. Yeah, thank you though. Thank you very much. So our next presentation is going to be from BWP. Do we have our presenters, if you want to come on up? Good evening. All right, so we just need a minute to switch over to.
Thanks very much.
Hello, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, nice to meet you.
That is nice to meet you. Thank you so much. Oh. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Mine's back there.
Rebecca. I believe so.
I never can tell who we
We are delighted to be here to respond to questions for your proposal request from BWP and Associates. That's Bickert, Webb, Plath and Associates. We're going to take about 10 minutes to review our PowerPoint presentation. We're just going to, because of the technology piece, we're going to focus on just highlighting information that we prepared for you in the PowerPoint handout. And we apologize to the audience because it won't be on the screen. But we really want to focus more on having the conversation with regards to your questions, some of which can be found in the PowerPoint or in the proposal, but much of which will need to be included as we have our conversation. So we're going to start off with some brief introductions. I'm Dr. Deborah Hill. I am the Managing Director and Partner for BWP and Associates, former retired school superintendent. I spent 24 years in District 65 as a teacher and as an administrator. I currently live in Evanston. This is my 40th year living here, so I'm a part of the community from the grassroots up. All of my kids went to Evanston schools, and so I have both a vested professional as well as personal interest in assisting you in finding the best possible person for District 65. In addition to that, I received my doctorate at Loyola, my undergraduate and master's at Northwestern. I have served as the president of ASCD, which is the largest professional organization outside of the teachers union with about 119,000 members in 112 countries. And so again, I'm delighted to be here. And we'll talk with you a little bit more about my possible role if you should appoint BWP as your search team. And now my colleagues. Oh, and I'm also the managing partner. I think I said that.
All right. Nice to see you, everyone. My name is Ann Nolinda, and I'm a partner in BWP and Associates. My educational background is I'm a retired superintendent from Forest Ridge School District 142, which is on the other side of the city, so fairly just kind of the opposite direction of where we are now. I've been retired for a number of years, and I started with BWP in 2005. And during that time period, I think my count of superintendent searches is about 60 to 65. I think we have a great track record. We've conducted a lot of searches. We've done a lot of good work with people. We follow up with our boards. We mentor our superintendents, which we'll talk to you about a little bit later. But that's a bit of my background. And now I'll let you meet Mark Friedman next.
the thorn between two roses, I guess. Best way to describe my two partners tonight. Mark Friedman, retired superintendent, 17 years as superintendent in Libertyville. After retiring, I then got into the interim business. I know we'll talk a little bit about that interim role. I was the interim at Niles Township High Schools. I was the interim in Winnetka, District 36, and Elk Grove Village, District 59, and right now I have 2 days left as the interim in Hawthorne School District in Vernon Hills. So one more board meeting and 2 actual work days. So if you need somebody to talk about interims, I kind of know what it's all about. So I've lived it and been very happy with it too. It can be a very rewarding job. All told, I'm president of the company. I have done more than 100 searches over these last 15 years or so. So been everywhere, in state, out of state, stay mostly close to home, mostly because of my grandkids. So I need to be close by to them. So what we bring to you is a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, but also success and personality.
Hopefully.
We're not going to do the page-by-page thing, but if you look through your PowerPoint, we have a little bit of a highlight as to who BWP actually is. There's 8 partners, 40 major associates. We have little satellite offices across the country because it was made up of the merger of 3 firms in 2006, including the oldest superintendent search firm in the country. Actually started in Winnetka and morphed into the Bickert Group. Then the Bickert Group morphed into BWP, Bickert, Webb & Associates, and Plath & Associates. And we've been in this format since 2006.
One of the critical masses and the things that I know about my community is we are really big on having options. And so consequently, one of the things I want to share with you are the roles that our consultants play. What's been interesting, I don't work for any other firm, but what I do know about the search firms is pretty much we have kind of the same format in terms of how we conduct a search. So I really want to focus a little bit on what sets us apart. First of all, in terms of our consultant roles, we have a lead or a co-lead consultant. That person is the liaison between a member of the board or the board in and of itself, the community, the staff, etc. They are responsible for making sure that all the communications is taken care of, that we develop and work directly with the board, and that they lead the other consultants when we start to look for candidates for the school district. Then we have consultants. Consultants consist of the members of the team as well as people across the country, in which we actually tap people on the shoulders because there are some people out there who may not know that they're looking for a job and that this would be the ideal place for them. So we do headhunt. We do go out and not only consider those who apply for the position, but once we have an opportunity to engage with the board and engage with staff and engage with community to determine what you specifically are looking for, then we can go out and network and find people to help us find potential candidates for you. And then finally, those associates, as I said, are national. So with my contacts, with Mark's contacts, with Ann's contacts, we know a lot of people across the country. I'm the sort of traveling consultant. I've worked in Connecticut and Missouri and Indiana, and so again, making those contacts and working in those communities gives us a broad base in order to be able to look for outstanding candidates.
If you're following along in your booklet, we're on the bottom of page 4.
Options.
Oh, you're going to do the options,
Yeah,
right?
let me
Sorry.
do the options. So,
Excuse me.
again, in terms of the transparency, as I've indicated, I am a member, a proud member of the Evanston-Skokie community and have been as such. And in some instances, there may be some concerns about selecting BWP because there may be a question about objectivity or conflict of interest. And so in seeking and knowing how Evanston-Skokie responds to transparency in terms of communication and rationale, we've provided you with 3 possible options should you select BWP and Associates. The first option is having me and Mark as the co-leads, with Ann as an associate working with us. But again, if there are questions with regards to objectivity, I've been here a long time, I know a lot about the school district, I have a lot of connections here, I know people on the board, I've mentored some of the administrators, I still know some teachers here, and so someone may raise the issue of, is she too close? Someone may raise the issue, is she have an vested interest, and is there a conflict of interest? So if the board determines that that's a concern and consideration, we provided option 2. And option 2 would be with Mark and Ann serving as your co-leads, and my serving as a consultant, which means I would be engaged in communications with the community, but not the direct head of that, engaged with selecting and identifying candidates and interviewing them and putting together the package and recommendations for possible candidates. However, if the board determines that's still too close, then I could be option 3, which is serving in my role as managing partner, not being on part of the team, not being a part of the consulting base, but being able to continue as manager to just monitor the paperwork and make sure everything is done. So we think that that's an important consideration for the board. We do not want BWP to be excluded from consideration for this search because of concerns about objectivity or a conflict of interest, and so we thus provided those 3 options.
We wanted to come right up front and say, Debbie is Miss Evanston, and sometimes when you are a high-profile person, sometimes people don't like that. So we want to give you that option. But we don't have those connections.
Right, but I do want to say, just to kind of back up what Deb was saying there, Mark and I just did the search in the district I live in. So I was a community member, and I didn't work in the district as Deb had, but I think it was an asset for us because we understood the community, and the community had some bumps that they had gone through, and I think they're on a good road now. So we'd offer that as an example to you as well of someone who did live in the community and worked on the search in that community. So any questions on her process? If not, we'll keep right on going and maybe come back to those a little bit later.
We know we are limited time.
We want to keep going, right?
I'm like the timekeeper guy, so sorry.
So as I was starting to say, on the bottom of page 4, we just briefly outlined the search, the 4 steps of the search. And you'll see that step number 1 are the specifications. And that's when we would meet with you and design the search and offer you lots of options for doing your search. Because while there are core components of each search, each community is different, and each community has different ideas about what a search looks like in their community. And we can guide you through that, but we also don't dictate how that process should look. We listen to you and design a process based on what will work for you. And that includes all the components of community engagement as well as involving your community. As Deb said, we know that's important to you, and that's the kind of expectation that you have. The second step is recruitment. Once we understand what we're looking at, we do active recruitment, as Deb talked about. I think probably our statistics would show you that at least 60% of our candidates, and maybe more, are ones we've recruited either personally or through our firm. Once we've got a group of candidates that we look at assessing those candidates based on your needs and your profile, which will help you develop. Then we turn it over to you. And the final step of the process is step number 4, which is selection. So we'll find you 5 to 6 candidates that we think meet your profile. We'll provide you extensive training for how you go about then conducting the next steps of the search, and give you some instruments that you can use to rate those candidates, questions, and we'll get you all prepared. We'll step back a little at that point and let you step to the forefront. And again, I'll let Mark go on from there, and we'll come back to that a little later.
There are probably a lot of questions about the detail of each of those steps. It's all spelled out in this PowerPoint. If I'll get you to turn to page 5, slide number 9, I want to dial back again on the interim piece, because it's a critical, you have a 2-stage process here. You need to get somebody on board who will get you through the year, somebody who has a proper certification, somebody who's trained to do evaluations of administrators, someone who has had experience in the superintendent seat, for that matter. So with that, we would provide you a timeline and a calendar. We've just gone through this in a very close neighbor district, East Prairie, right next door in Skokie. Very small, one school district. They are a week or two ahead of you. That's about it. They've just selected 2 interims for this coming school year who will start in July. And then we'll have the luxury of taking time to do the superintendent search. And so with that, we created a timeline and a calendar. We identified certain candidates who would be a good match for that district based upon some superficial things, but a good match. And only the board will know when you meet candidates whether they're the perfect match or not. We provided an assessment of those candidates, basically interviews and resumes. And then we gave the board some sample questions and gave them the initiative to get moving forward on this selection process for the interim. So that was the first stage. That's done. They're all set. I actually have with you a sample of the 2 people that were selected to share the interim role. By the way, you do know an interim can work 120 days if they're a retired superintendent. If they're not, if they're between jobs or from out of state, they can work a full year. But generally, it's 120 days, and generally 2 people are shared because you need about 240 days to get through the school year. 220 to 240 will do it. So they put together a great entry plan, and I'll leave that with you when we walk out so that you can get a sense of some of the things that they're going to be doing in the interim role. So that's that first stage. We're really experienced in doing that. We've probably done 15 interim placements. So
Yeah, I did another similar one in Oak Park and River Forest, which is kind of a similar community to you, and they ended up going with an out-of-state person who then could work more days. So you have options depending on how you do that. Yep.
So, BWP guarantee, what sets us apart? First of all, we're on call 24/7, and I like to tell the tale of talking with board members when I was in Connecticut who were in the middle of a board session and they had a question and they called me and I had to excuse myself from the salesperson in Bed Bath & Beyond because that's where I was taking this call, but they needed to have some specifics.
I've had calls in unusual places too. Yeah.
But the point is that we're available 24/7. One of the questions I heard asked of the previous firm is what searches are you doing now? My colleagues are engaged in a couple of searches, but I'm not. As a managing partner, I usually typically only do 2, maybe 3 searches a year, and I usually select proposals for places where I would want to work in terms of being a school superintendent. So the fact that I'm here before you, that sends a message relative to my interest in serving you and serving the community, again, to find a good superintendent. Mentoring for the new superintendent. This has been a BWP exclusive, whether it's the interim superintendent or a permanent superintendent, permanent in quotation marks. We provide a year's worth of mentoring after the contract is signed. We want there to be a success story, a good marriage between the board and the new individual. And so consequently, we're available on call to work with those individuals. And in addition to that, we help you determine, help that transition process, and that cost is already included in what our total cost is. It's not a separate fee. Keep moving. Keep moving, Marcus, push me, okay. If the successful candidate for the permanent position does not complete 2 years in the position, then we redo the search at the cost of just fees, their expenses, not fees. We don't charge a fee for that. And finally, we will not slate a previously placed candidate in another search for the term of their contract. In other words, we don't cherry pick. We don't go out and somebody was good here, we're going to pluck them someplace else. And so consequently, and the applicants know that if they're part of the search, that's a part of our agreement.
We don't believe in the poaching idea. However, people are free sometimes to make moves. If you create the right culture, the right environment, the right relationships, that's not an issue.
Right.
But in places where those things don't exist, then people do move around. That's human nature. That happens at Xerox, at AbbVie, and all the big corporations. So we're no different.
Our fees are listed on page 8. For the interim search, there's a $5,000 fee. For the permanent search, there's a $20,500 fee, with expenses of about $4,950, just under $5,000. And our expenses will not exceed $30,450 for both searches. I'm very good at being a miser about spending other people's money, particularly the board. I get teased a lot because I was doing a search in Indiana, and I refused to pay the amount of money that it cost to fly there, so I took the bus. Much to the dismay, took the mega bus because it just didn't make sense to me for the board to have to absorb that cost. And so again, that fee is our set fee. If we incur other expenses beyond that, we absorb those. The additional expenses for the board would include any advertising, and we will help the board establish what that would look like. But again, there's a cap that we recommend relative to that piece. And then other expenses in terms of community engagement activities, when you get to your semifinalist candidates, travel for them, et cetera, those are considered separate fees beyond our base fee of $30,450. Finally?
The next few pages really reflect some research that we've done on our success rates. And one of our colleagues, who happens to be a professor at Concordia, right now retired superintendent, put together a really nice study. And on page 9, you see some of this reflected on BWP's track record. What percentage of superintendents remain, who got second offers of contracts. The numbers are really high up there. But even the most important thing is the satisfaction numbers that we get from people that we've placed who are happy, and boards are happy with that marriage, so to speak. We have pretty high numbers on that.
It was really kind of humbling of me to read through that research because of really the superintendents in particular, I think, that we have placed in the board presidents that we have worked with. It's our mission to really provide good service to them. And I think that survey and that research kind of shows that.
And finally, let's just hit real quickly on why BWP. That's page 10, slide number 19, unmatched record of success. We are popular. We can't stand here and say we won't be doing any other searches this year. That wouldn't be fair. We will.
Mark and I multitask. Deb likes to.
Yeah. But that's why we work on teams. And this is just the surface team. We have a whole lot of background team. Our executive assistant, who's an Evanstonian, born and raised and went to school here, is with us tonight too. She wanted to be part of this whole process. And we say, come on, Cam, come along with us. So wave, Cam. So you can
Your former student.
Yeah, former student who went to school right down the street. Our resources and our networking are unmatched. We have a network that reaches beyond this immediate area. But today, things are different. Things are different than maybe 5 years ago when you were out, maybe way different than 10 years ago. The social media piece has really played a major role. And what it has done is it's shrunken the pool of candidates. People are really afraid, unless they're serious, to expose themselves to the rejection and the potential that the rejection could lead to somebody in the home district finding out, oh, why were you interviewing there? You don't love us anymore. Well, that happens. And so we've seen a need to take some different strategies in talking to candidates and giving them the whisper in the ear kind of approach and the flattery to get them to be candidates in quality school districts. I don't think we've ever done a search in a place where we don't feel it's a quality school district. But every place is different. Every culture is different. And a person that fits District A might not at all fit District B. That becomes our real responsibility.
I think
to
our
get that
philosophy
fit.
is all kids are deserving of a good leader. And that's what we try to find for you, a good leader, but it needs to be for your kids. The ones that, the more we find out about what your needs are, then we will narrow that down to find a leader for your kids, even though, because not all leaders work in all situations.
The search is about the adults, but in the end,
It's
it's
about
really
the kids.
for the kids.
Right.
So, you try and look past, okay, every adult's got flaws. The kids don't yet. So let's do
Let's see if we
everything we
can keep
can
it
to
that
help
way,
them.
yeah.
Yeah. You want to wrap?
Yes, so now we will take questions.
Yeah.
We hope that we've answered some of them in our presentation, but we'll be happy
We
to.
tried to be brief.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I will kick off with the same question that I did with the first firm. And being a part of the community, you know that we've had an increased focus on racial equity within our school district, within our community generally. So can you tell us what process you have in place to identify candidates who will be able to meet the needs of a racially and culturally diverse community? In your response, can you specifically address, if we select your firm, what have your consultants done to deepen their own understanding of racial and cultural differences? How do you determine a candidate's racial consciousness and their ability to understand issues of diversity and cultural differences?
That's what it's all about, right? Deb, you want to start in? We'll chip in.
Of course, they're going to let me start, so I can chip in.
Problem with that, yeah.
I think the critical mass is, here in District 65, we've been dealing with the gap forever. I was a teacher here, I was an administrator here, I've been a parent in the district, and we haven't touched on just the right key. But I'm convinced that if it can be done anywhere, it could be done here. With the right tools, with the right elements, with the right philosophy. So I think from that perspective, it's looking at our history, but also projecting in our future in terms of what we're talking about when we're speaking about in terms of racial equity and racial issues. And so I think that from that perspective, we bring a unique historic perspective of what Evanston School District 65 has been about and wants to be about. And that is not only serving all kids, but serving all kids in a manner that's going to project them into the future. And so I think that's a critical mass relative to our community and our students. I think that, again, our history lends itself to looking at new ideas, to taking a look at what we've done successfully, because we do have some successful things that have happened here in District 65, and then looking other places to see what other successes that they have had and which of those things that we can incorporate. But we must keep our eye on the prize and not get diverted in terms of some other kinds of issues and things that come up. And dollars to donuts, my community is very, very focused and very, very interested in closing the racial achievement gap, making sure that our students are prepared to take on the 21st century challenges and to do great things in the world. So consequently, I think that, in response to that, making sure that we have a leader who is not only a vested leader in the community, but who can come in and utilize the strengths that we have, bring some additional value and information to the community in and of itself, but recognize that here in Evanston, we do function as a high-functioning, high-involvement community, and consequently, someone coming in will need to pay attention to that, not only from the perspective of cultural diversity, not only from the perspective of community engagement, not only from the perspective of a fabulous staff and administration, but how do you garner all that, and how do you pull that together in order to address some of the issues that face us in the world today?
As far as our candidates are concerned, there's just so many things that we could talk about, but for me, I want to look at their body of work, because all the people we're going to bring you have been experienced leaders, either as superintendents or as in other leadership roles. So I'm going to look at their body of work, and that's going to speak for itself. That's their story. That's their educational story of the work they've chosen to complete, and some of the evidence of that. I'm also going to look at what they've done in their personal lives. some of the organizations maybe that they've chosen to be a part of, or some of the work that they've chosen to do outside of the workday to demonstrate their commitment. And I'm also going to look in their heart. If I can do that, I mean, and none of us really can see a person's heart, but I want to be able to feel in my heart that that person wants to do that work. So some of it is going to be just a gut feeling for the work they've done and what they're able to convince us their life mission is.
Yeah, and we do a lot of searches in communities with very diverse student populations. Not only that, there probably isn't a firm out there as diverse as our own organization. And we practice that because we all like each other and believe in it. And it just makes things from our end so much easier because there aren't any big discussions. We all get it. And so from the success that we've had in school systems with high numbers of minority population, whether it's Hispanic, African American, whether in Niles Township High School when I was there, and we also did 3 searches at the same time, and we had 60 different languages and backgrounds, and I couldn't even rattle them off of my life dependent on them now, but I learned them when I was there. Those things just come natural to us. It isn't a decision, let's go after a search in a district with diversity. We just do our job. And so I think that's why everybody's on the same page.
Thank you for that answer. I had a question in regards to what, so, we were interested in, as you heard, we're really focused on racial equity and making sure that at all levels, the leadership reflects the community that we're in. What firms or what professional organizations do you search out, for instance, to seek high quality African American and Latinx candidates?
All of them.
Oh, yeah. Everyone.
Can you name a couple?
We're gonna advertise in NABC and the
National
ALAS.
Association of
Yeah,
Black
for definitely. Those will be 2 key ones we're going to advertise in. Mark and I will be speaking next week in an Aspiring Superintendents Conference, which is very diverse. We're going to put, if we know we're looking by then, we would put the word out even as early as that to begin to.
Any Latino firms that you may know of, or
well, the ALAS, yeah, the
Yes, yes.
yeah, which we always advertise in and work with as we can. And we've got people in our firm that are.
is our contact
Yeah,
person.
we've got people in our firm who are involved in those organizations as well, which is helpful. When you know somebody who also knows the organization well, we can work a little bit better with us. And then we've got our international person here.
Yes, and again, that connection and that contact with 119 countries, let us not just take a look at what's happening in the United States, because there are some fabulous things happening in other parts of the world.
And you've been there.
I've had an opportunity as the past president of ASCD to do some traveling and to look at, to be able to explore some things that we need to be thinking about here in the United States in terms of educating our kids. And so again, looking for people who have those kinds of connections and those kinds of directions to lead the school district would be another important aspect of who we would seek for you.
Okay, can you expand a little bit on some of those ideas that you think that you saw from other countries that we should adopt?
Okay, and I'm going to hearken back to my District 65 days as a teacher, as an administrator, assistant superintendent, interim superintendent, acting superintendent over a 24-year period of time. Having traveled to several countries, one of the things that concerns me is bilingual education. And in the United States, we look at bilingual education kind of as a maybe afterthought. Whereas in other countries, even some of the poorest countries, their students are multilingual from the beginning. They are multilingual from the beginning. They start with those students as kindergartners or preschoolers, and so by the time they leave middle school, they are multilingual. We kind of do it as an add-on. Well, maybe we'll do Spanish, maybe we'll do French, maybe we'll start at 5th grade, maybe we'll start at 6th grade. And so I'm not sure that as a country, we are serious and understand the efficacy of our students being bilingual. Having traveled to some countries, and I come back home and say, my kids are in trouble because they're not going to be able to compete globally because we have such a backwards view of bilingual education. that it's a tack-on possible maybe, as opposed to even in some of the poorest countries. In Cambodia, students speak 3 languages when they start school. And they don't have the resources that we have. And I just think that that's a prime example of something that we in the States are not doing right.
And one more sort of a secret weapon, as we call it. One of our really close colleagues, whose name is in your proposal, and we can bring her in if we need to, Sheila Harrison-Williams is the president of Illinois Association of School Administrators this past year. That's the Superintendents Association for the state of Illinois. She has access to everyone and is just an amazing recruiter and amazing personality. So that helps us access the right candidates, and we've used her contacts many, many times. And again, would probably help us on this search too.
I just wanted to ask another question too about your approach to stakeholder engagement, as you've noted and understand that we have a community that is highly engaged. In a community that has diverse and sometimes divergent opinions, how do you set up stakeholder sessions to be productive? What format do you recommend by stakeholder group, and what questions or process do you use to elicit input?
I think the first thing, living in the Evanston community and knowing how active and engaged and involved we are to set the parameters and to provide the rationale for them. The board's job is to elect the superintendent and to select the superintendent and to hire the superintendent. The community's job is to provide feedback and input, not to pick. They don't get to pick. And I think that that's an important distinction, that they provide feedback and input with regards to transparency that's provided by the board relative to the process. And so I think that that's a major distinction. I think that the second part to that is in terms of how we structure it. We have really 4 different input points. 1, we interview individual members of the board. 2, we interview individual members that the board suggests that they would like to have some one-on-one input. 3, we engage the staff, very important. 4, we engage the community. Engagement with the community consists of focus groups in which the board then will select key members of the community, much like you did when we had when you were looking at the selection of your minority student achievement person. I was on one of those committees that came in to talk about that. Then in addition to that, we recommend a community survey that goes out to all members of the community. So whether you have a school child or not, you're engaged in terms of that particular piece. And then the focus groups, again, where the board has identified key leaders that we work with them. In addition, working with the staff, both at the administrative level as well as the teacher staff. Much needed input and feedback relative to that piece. We have 4 basic questions that everyone is asked that's included as a part of the district-wide community survey. What skill sets do you think will be important for members of the district? What things do you think you can share with the school, share with the candidates that are issues and concerns? And so we have these questions. What other things do you think the board needs to consider? The strengths of the candidate and things that might need to be improved relative to the district. And so across the board, everybody gets to answer those same 4 questions. By the time we complete all of that data, I usually do a statistical analysis that takes all that data, and then we come up with a profile based on about 80% responses to those individual questions, so that we'll know, and the community and the board can agree on what you're going to be looking for a school superintendent.
The only thing I was going to add to what Deb was saying is too, we usually try to have at least one open meeting, because you can identify groups, but there may be somebody sitting out there that said, what about me? So we don't want to leave anyone out in our focus groups. So we'll hold just one evening or morning, whatever you think is best, open meeting, and take people that want to come and talk to us. And it's kind of that simple.
What we've seen in even districts with a lot of involvement, that since we've gone to online surveying, the open meetings have seen dwindling numbers to a point where some places 2 and 3 in a very active place like Hinsdale, we had two. One had 2 people, one had 3 people. People were saying, I'm doing it online. I could do it from the comfort of my home. So it's changed the landscape a little bit.
And the other thing I would kind of add to what they're telling you is this is all open session. You know, the things that we're doing up to this point that we've all talked about are things we do out in the open. The community meetings, of course, and those things are all open, as well as us coming back to you and presenting our data that Deb talked about collecting. That's for you and your community, and we do it right here.
And you determine if you'd like to have the survey done in multiple languages. And so that's another critical piece. What we found is that Spanish, particularly with the Hispanic population here in Evanston, would probably be a critical mass. But I recently did a search in Lewiston, Maine, and they had 8 different languages that we needed to develop the survey in. And what was interesting is we only got 1 or 2 responses from the various languages, except for the Hispanic population in terms of that particular piece. But again, we work with the board to determine what's going to be the best way to gather information from the community in totality. Recognizing that the high school has a vested interest, Northwestern has a vested interest, so we want to make sure that they are included. But again, I'm fairly familiar with a lot of the organizations, the ministerial alliances, the fraternities and sororities, the Women's Club, you know, some of those organizations, Kiwanis, Rotary, all of those need to be engaged in a part of this process. And so again, we work with the board to determine what that looks like and how we can engage them, especially related to your permanent superintendent, but to some degree, how would the board like to approach the interim position as well? Because I know my community, and they're not just going to sit and let the board decide interim without having an opportunity to have something to say about it.
And so that actually leads into just, you know, and I'm being respectful of the time, but your philosophy on closed versus open searches and where you would.
Well, you know, there's one thing for sure. If you do a closed, and there's several ways to do it, you can modify it in a lot of ways. If you do a modified closed search, you'll get a larger applicant pool. If you do an open search where candidates know they're going to be exposed to groups and be exposed to the public. I'm not saying releasing the names. Nobody does that anymore. We don't release names. But people who then are invited to come back in, if they're being interviewed by community groups and multiple groups, they'll back away. They're not going to take the greater risk. And we've seen that in so many places now. So the reality of it is there's a way to do this, and there's a way to do it in a hybrid form, one being narrowing down to final candidates, and then having some select confidential groups participate in interviews to give the board feedback. You don't want groups making the decision for you. You're the board. That is your school code responsibility. But you certainly would like to have input from these other groups that'll help you in your decision, especially if you're torn between a couple of candidates and you need a tiebreaker or two. So that's what we've seen, that's what we've been doing quite a bit lately, where getting down to the finals, having a couple of candidates at the finals, they know that we're going to have a confidential agreement signature from everybody participating. We can't guarantee people won't talk. I'm not going to stand up here and think we live in a land where, you know, you can guarantee everybody is absolutely going to guarantee the confidentiality. However, that's the best we can do on that unless you go with a totally closed search. Many districts are doing closed searches now, straight closed searches, just because they want to have the best pool.
I had a couple of questions. One, I was wondering, do you all have the capacity to conduct focus groups in Spanish as well, or in other languages besides English?
Yes, we typically work with the district and use your interpreters to come in and be a part of that and work with them. We facilitate those focus groups, but essentially we utilize your staff because, one, your parents and community and staff are familiar with them and trust them, and they in turn also trust them as well. And so we do provide or help you provide translation for the groups as you designate. As I said, when I worked in Lewiston, I worked with the staff to create the survey, the online survey in multiple languages. And then that staff ultimately had an opportunity to interpret that data, and we included it as a part of our final report.
We did the same thing in Niles Township High School, working with their staff to facilitate all of their parents that wanted to be involved in the process.
Multiple languages in Niles.
They did a nice job there.
Okay.
The staff did.
Thank you. Another question I had was, historically, have you all had any relationships with HBCUs in terms of recruiting applicants or developing relationships?
Sheila has.
Sure you have.
Sheila has, and our Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority has a direct relationship with HBCUs. And so consequently, I'm often engaged in working with HBCU.
She probably has her bag back there.
For no pay, right?
Faculty
Volunteer.
in terms of encouraging them. But I also need to point out that when I began in administration and when I was working in Oak Park River Forest, they actually sent me to HBCUs to recruit. And so having had that experience and kind of knowing what students are looking for and the kinds of information and material you need to share with them to encourage them to come on home and participate in our educational structure and system, we have quite a bit of experience in.
Okay. And then you've spoken to this a little bit, but I was hoping to hear more about what are some of the strategies that you use to determine the racial literacy of candidates and to attract a diverse pool of candidates.
You want to jump in? I feel like I'm talking too much. But
Evanston itself
Right.
is one thing. The community of Evanston would be an attractive place for someone who wants to work in that type of an environment. So that's one thing right there.
And actually, you're going to find that it's not as difficult as it used to be many years ago. The country is changing, and consequently, as we're doing searches, as I'm doing searches across the country, everybody is looking for minority candidates, people who come, particularly at the staff level, to work with, because the landscape of the student population is changing. And so having exposure and being able to network with the professional organizations that we talked about, not only NAPSI, but the Hispanic organization, there's an Asian organization, there are groups out there that we communicate with, connect with, send out the information, the profile, so that we can try to attract candidates from those organizations. The other piece is looking at non-traditional. We have non-traditional people who've come in from the business field, from multiple diverse aspects, but not poo-pooing them as well in terms of looking for appropriate candidates. So the biggest piece is developing your profile and determining what you're looking for, and then not only just accepting applicants, but actually headhunting and going out to find people who have the experiences that would make them successful here. So it really is about the experiences that then the candidates bring forward. And it's not just telling us, but it's demonstrating. It's showing us. So what have you done? What have you written? Give us an example of communication strategies. How have you interacted with parents? How have you interacted with low-income parents? How have you interacted with gifted parents? All of those pieces are components that we then look for as we're looking for candidates.
I think to add to that too, our business is a relationship business. I mean, we can recruit as well as we can have relationships with people that we know that we think would be a good fit for you. So the three of us and the other people that in our firm that we've talked about are visible and out there, and we take pride in meeting people, in knowing people, in finding people, and in maintaining those relationships with people so that when we have this position available, we know who to call.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the presentation and the time, and we will.
Good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Anticipate making your decision?
We will be deliberating after we hear all of the presentations tonight.
We gotta get going on that interim.
And I'm going to leave you a copy for your board records.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Here, with that too. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
That's what she does.
Hey, Rebecca.
Interim entry-level plan.
This is the East Prairie one?
Great, thanks very much.
Don't tell them we're giving you some.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Did you have one extra one to give to the board member who's not present? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then with that, our next firm that we'll be presenting is, oh,
She's with John right now.
the next,
She was one of the starters with that group. Yeah.
yes, if you're ready to get started. Oh, we're ready. I think, do we, showing no signal. Okay, so yes, please go ahead and introduce yourselves and get.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Gary Zabilka, and I am one of the partners for School Exec Connect. First of all, thank you for having us here to present our firm's proposal regarding doing an interim search as well as a superintendent search. Briefly, my background is such that I was superintendent actually a couple miles down the road here in Morton Grove. Retired there after 10 years of service as a superintendent in that district. Prior to that, I served as a superintendent in Morton Grove, served as a principal in Vernon Hills, and a teacher in Vernon Hills as well. In addition to my work as a superintendent, I've been a member of our firm for 8 years. During that time, I have done well over 30 searches, primarily here in the suburban area, many of the districts very nearby to where you are, and have had the opportunity to meet a lot of good quality people. I also am a field service director for the Illinois Association of School Administrators. That's the State Superintendents Association. In that role, I primarily coach and mentor brand new superintendents and also provide professional development for them. So through all of these things, I mention all of those things just to let you know that stay very connected and very current with what's happening in our profession and try to stay in touch with the best quality people who are out there. At this time, I'd also like to introduce our associate who's not present. Dr. Linda Yankee will be serving as a part of this team if we're fortunate enough to be selected to work with your district. Dr. Yankee is a retired superintendent from New Trier School District, where she served for numerous years. She's been a member of our firm for the last 3 years and has done numerous searches. She actually is not here because she's currently serving as an interim superintendent at Deerfield Highland Park High School District. So that's where Dr. Yankee is. But she asked us to give her best and her regrets for not being here, and she would look forward to working with you as well.
Good evening. I'm Harry Rossi. I'm a retired superintendent from Northbrook Glenview School District 30. I was superintendent there for 18 years. Prior to that, I was principal, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, pretty much done everything. During my career upon retirement, I did two things. I founded a lobbying firm for public education called FedEd. We represented about 100 suburban school districts. Your district, on and off, was a member. of Fed Ed. I turned that over to other people a couple of years ago. I'm also one of the founding members of School Exec Connect. The firm was founded in 2004. I'm one of the partners in the firm. I've taught in superintendent's program at Loyola University in Chicago for about 20 years altogether. Currently, I'm on a consulting contract with them. We've just redone our superintendent's program using best practices, state of the art, and so on. In addition to that, I mentor first-year administrators through the North Cook Intermediate Service Center. Again, as Gary said, all of that is just to say that even though we're retired superintendents, we've been involved and continue to be involved in public education and have been for our entire adult lives. So, pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us. Would you like us to just briefly outline our proposal at this point?
That would be great, and then we can do some questions.
So we understand that you are looking for an interim superintendent and then a permanent superintendent. So obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, finding an interim superintendent is our most immediate task. We've been discussing that. We've also, believe it or not, had an individual who has come forward and has indicated interest. We also have just done an interim superintendent placement in the western suburbs, and we have told all of those individuals who applied, and there were about 8 altogether, that we would keep them informed about future interim possibilities. So the market out there is really good. There are a number of people, and I should preface it by saying, very well qualified, successful former superintendents who are out there who are interested in doing interims. The key is, because I don't think you're alone in seeking an interim right now, the key is to try to get that process done sooner rather than later, and I believe your timeline is August. You'd like to have somebody by August. That is extremely doable given the market out there right now. So we would immediately start on that, and we would advertise your position and then start doing our due diligence to bring forward to you a list of individuals that we would consider to be highly qualified for you to then interview. Once that part is done, actually simultaneously, we would start working on at least getting your position up on our website and making sure that we start letting people know through recruitment that this position is available and that we're doing the search. And one of the things that I think characterizes us, and I've probably done over the 16 years now that I've been doing searches, I've probably done 70 to 75 searches altogether. And I think what characterizes us is that we don't just accept applications. We will be out there recruiting for you. We'll be looking for the best people to match your community, especially once we get through our process, which would include having focus groups within the district, meeting with the board to find out what your priorities are, and then putting together also an online survey with very similar questions to the ones that we would be asking of the focus groups, so that you're going to get data from all of those groups. Once we have all of that data, I know we only have 10 minutes, so I'm going through it quickly. Once we have all of that data, We would present that to you in terms of a profile. We would also pick out what we have heard from groups that common elements that we've heard from all of the groups, use those to build a specific profile as to the person, related to the person you're looking for. Obviously, upon approval of the board, we would then use that to go out and start interviewing, vetting candidates, and then bringing them forward to you. For your first round of interviews, for your second round of interviews, we would suggest having a stakeholders committee once you get down to 2 or 3 finalists. We would suggest that you add a stakeholders committee, and we'll go through that, at your question time if you have questions about that. But anyone who is on that stakeholders committee would have to sign a confidentiality agreement. They would have the opportunity to ask structured questions, no ranking, no pressure on the board, because we make it clear to everyone with whom we meet that under the school code, this is something that, the board is tasked to do with, advice from stakeholders, with advice from people within the focus groups. But we make it very clear that this is the board's final decision to make. We will help you along the way with questions and anything else that you need. We'll do our reference checking. We'll give you advice on how to follow that up, and then help you if you suggest that you need help to get to the final candidate. Again, like everyone else, I think you've probably heard, this is really the board search. We're here to facilitate it for you. And while we will and do have a procedure that we've recommended and a timeline that we've recommended, that is flexible, and we certainly work with the board on making whatever adjustments need to be made. Gary.
In your packets, you have a copy of a flow chart that basically, in our minds at least, hopefully in yours as well, very clearly articulates our process. There are aspects of it that we as the firm do specifically for you. There are aspects that you as the board will be semi-responsible for, but then most importantly are those aspects where we work together very closely in order to work through the process in such a way that, that it's very clear that you're not only understanding the process, working through the process in the way that you would like to see it, but then also be transparent yet confidential at the same time. What I mean by that, that's kind of a yin and a yang, if you will. In looking at superintendent candidates, we're strong proponents of confidential searches. However, the process can be very open as to how we're going about the process itself. And your community should know that you're looking at every possible avenue to attract the best candidates. However, when it comes time to actually interviewing the candidates, we maintain that level of confidentiality, even to the point where when a stakeholder committee is identified, where you have people actually come in and participate in the process, we have them sign letters of confidentiality, just ensuring the fact that those candidates who are your finalist candidates, that their identities will be protected only because there are possibilities that the superintendent, the next superintendent you hire, is currently a superintendent in another district. And if that is the case, one doesn't want that other district to know until the candidate is ready to tell them, just as I'm sure you would respect that as well as a board. So.
Yeah, just one final note. I guess 2004, when I was retiring, I was recruited by all of the firms at the time. And the reason I selected School Exec Connect was to be on the ground floor, And to work with other people, I had always run a collaborative district. And the people who were starting this firm made the commitment that when one of us had a search, everyone is involved in that search. So it just won't be Gary, Linda, and I who would be involved in the search, but we would include everyone else in our firm to help with it. And the other thing that I think may separate us from others is how intensely we recruit people based on the profile that we've developed and approved by the board. Our firm has a 96% rate of retention, meaning that 96% have been offered second contracts. In Illinois, the Illinois part of our firm, we've had 100% success, and certainly Gary and I have done, between us, probably 100 or more searches and have never had any who have not been offered a second contract.
However, we get nervous every time we say
do.
that because there's always a first time. No, but we wouldn't expect that to happen, of course.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll open up with my first question. Can you tell us what process you have in place to identify candidates who will be able to meet the needs of a racially and culturally diverse community? In your response, can you specifically address, if we select your firm, what have your consultants done to deepen their own understanding of racial and cultural differences? How do you determine a candidate's racial consciousness and their ability to understand issues of diversity and cultural differences?
Well, first of all, I guess what I would say is that we recruit diverse candidates from around the country, and I think our firm is known as a firm that treats culturally diverse candidates in a first-class way. We have always been inclusive. I grew up in a culturally diverse neighborhood on the west side of Chicago, and have always been involved with organizations to promote cultural diversity. I know Gary has as well. But the most important part of all of this is when we do our recruitment for your district, are we not just going to say, all right, we're going to make sure that we present to you culturally diverse candidates? I think what our commitment is that we would be looking for the most successful candidates who are out there. Many of them have, I've told you I've taught at Loyola in the superintendent's program for 20 years. Many of them have been my students. We, in addition to teaching leadership skills, in addition to teaching management skills, we teach social justice. That's part of every curriculum that Gary and I have taught at Loyola. So social justice is a big part of what, the fabric of our lives have been. Both of us have been part of that university for a long time. So we would, in our recruitment nationally, we would make sure in our advertising that people understand that we're looking for people who understand and appreciate cultural and racial diversity, and diversity of all kinds, actually, LGBTQ as well.
I'm sure you recognize that diversity is a very current term these days, and people can say, oh, I can work with diversity and with diverse cultures and populations and such. But it's the experience that they can share and talk about that they've done. When I was superintendent in Morton Grove, if you've been in this area, I was there during the time when the mosque was being built, and it was a very controversial time, and I actually sat on the committee with somebody from the Department of Justice out of Washington, D.C., and worked together with all the leaders in the community to make sure and ensure that people would be open to this, even so far as to the point when the mosque was being built, there was no place for them to pray during Ramadan. And we actually opened up our school in Morton Grove Public School. We received some heat for that, but we believed it was the right thing to do. And that basically helped develop a relationship. I mention that not to say anything about me, but to say that people who are open to diversity and open to treating different cultures the way that they should be treated have examples of things like this that they stand for and promote. So.
Thank you. Can you tell us, what is your firm's approach to stakeholder engagement in creating a leadership profile? Specifically, in a community that has diverse and sometimes divergent opinions, how do you set up these sessions to be most productive? What format do you recommend by stakeholder group, and what questions or process do you use to elicit input?
We make a distinction between focus groups and stakeholders groups, but you can use them interchangeably. So what we would call our focus group would be the first part of the process where we're actually gathering data from all of the groups. So what we would do is work with the board to determine which stakeholders would be part of the focus groups. Typically, there is a group that includes teachers, support staff, external community members, internal community members, parents, and we hold those meetings at convenient times for those groups. So parent meetings would be in the evening. The teachers and support staff typically would be right after school. And we would work with your scheduler. We would have a point person whom you would designate, and have the focus groups at convenient times for whichever groups you see are important. But I mentioned a few of them, but every district is a little bit different, and sometimes the politics in different districts are different as well. So we would work with you to make sure that we were not excluding any group that you saw as important to have a stake in developing the profile. So that's the beginning. Those are the focus groups. What we would do then is we would ask the same questions to all of those groups, and we would have a list of questions that we would present to you for your approval. Those same questions we would put on your website with a link so that people who either can't or don't want to come to any of the focus groups would have the opportunity to then weigh in online, and we would have common data that we could use, present to you, and then, as I mentioned, we would pick out common themes that we have heard from all of those groups to say to you, this appears to be what your district is looking for in their next superintendent.
Our main goal, our main goal through those processes is to ensure that everyone at least has the opportunity to weigh in as they should. And, so whether it be through a focus group or through the online survey, nobody should be able to come forth and say, nobody asked my opinion. We would make sure that word got out that we're continually asking their opinion during that period of time to solicit as much input as possible, because that also is valuable in creating the profile that ultimately then is decided upon by the board, that's the candidate that they're looking for.
Yeah. And then we would let people in the focus groups know that the board, assuming the board chooses to have a stakeholders group, when they're selecting the final candidate, we would let them know that the focus groups are not the only opportunity that they would have to weigh in. There would be representation, not in as great numbers, obviously, but there would be representation at the point at which you're selecting the final individuals. And that group, we would work with you again on and making a determination as to which groups, which individuals you wanted represented.
Any other questions? I guess the final question that I would have for you then is, what other executive searches are you committed to during this time frame?
We are doing Kenilworth right now. We're doing Center Cass, which is a western suburban district, Lake Bluff.
Those are the ones that we're committed to at this point.
Those three.
Yeah. That we are. Our firm has many more, but
those are
the ones that we're primarily involved in.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much for your time, for the presentation. We'll be deliberating on this further later this evening and plan on making a decision tonight. So
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
We have one more firm. Do we have Ray and Associates here?
We have the packet.
What's that?
We have the packet.
We have the packet? Yeah. I'm waiting outside, maybe.
That's why I took two.
You can be right here, and you have a presentation that you sent, so let me just pull it up. Here, you can set your stuff down there.
Do you have our presentation?
Yes, it's already up here, so,
Both of them or just one?
I believe I have one. So I have the one that's highlights.
Yeah, would you pull that one up? Let's just talk from that one.
Okay.
Oh, how do I move it forward?
So here is your clicker and the arrow. Oh, we're that way.
Okay. Joe.
Is it two slides?
So we'll start with this one. And how do I turn it on here?
I will turn that on.
Okay, great.
Hi,
Thank you.
Yeah, good to meet you too. Thank you so much.
I'm Sumi. Oh, the dealer is helping you with the technology up there. Thank you. She's sitting here, yes.
Thank you. Seth Hernandez, nice to meet you.
Perfect, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Candace.
Anya.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Sumi. Nice to meet you, thank you.
Nice to meet you, thank you.
You're the newbie.
Yeah, you're Liz.
Anya,
Nice to meet you.
thank you.
Hi, good evening, welcome, Rebecca.
Rick Mills, nice to meet you.
Yes, please, thank you.
Oh.
We're ready? Yeah. Well, good evening. My name is Rick Mills from Ray & Associate, and my colleague and associate Robert Hammond here. Pleasure to be here this evening with you, and allow Robert to just give a brief overview or a summary of his background and experience.
I've been in the education business like 40 or 45 years. I started when I was really, really young, and I've held just about every kind of a position one could have. And I'm from Sycamore, Illinois, which is a suburb of DeKalb of Northern Illinois University, and I retired there as superintendent of schools for a long period of time.
Can we ask you to, I don't know if those.
Okay.
You can either be seated and be
Yeah.
close to the
Seated?
mic, yeah, or if you're at the podium, either way.
We'll try it this. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. As I was saying, I've been in the education field for maybe 40, 45 years. I've held every position that one could have. I am from Sycamore, Illinois, which is right next to DeKalb, Northern Illinois University. And I retired there a few years ago as superintendent, having been employed by Sycamore for 21 years. I have been involved in numerous searches here in Illinois and outside of Illinois, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening and to talk to you about Ray & Associates and what we might be able to offer you as you go forward to search for a superintendent as well as an interim superintendent. So.
Thanks, Bob. Again, my name is Rick Mills. I've been with Ray & Associates for about 3 years now and have done several searches with Ray & Associates, who's out of Iowa. And we're really pleased to be here again. So if I could, I'll draw your attention to the packet, and I'll go through that quickly, and I'll give a quick overview of myself, and then we'll go through the highlighted slides here, and there's a more extensive packet in your folder there that I'll highlight some of the key points on those slides. There are about 15 slides. I don't want to give you death by PowerPoint tonight, so I'll kind of highlight the slides, and then we'll get into the questions that you have. I'm a retired Army colonel, 25 years. Transitioned into public education in 2001 and spent about 17 years in education. Started out in Chicago Public Schools 10 years, worked my way up to area superintendent of 26 high schools there. Went off to Minneapolis, where I was the CEO of Minneapolis Public Schools for 2 years. And then I went down to Florida, where I was the superintendent of a county school system down there until I retired and left in 2015. And so I've been in public education again for about 17 years, and I really enjoy doing searches, working with school boards and school districts and community members to help them find that next superintendent that they're looking for. So on the first slide here that I'll show, this illustrates the highlights of what we offer as a value added and what sets us apart as a search firm. I'd like to highlight a couple of key points on here as you go through them. That Ray & Associates has been in this business for 44 years, since about 1975. And we have 160 associates all throughout the United States, and a good diversity of pool of our associates, about 40% diverse in race and gender. And that allows us to draw a pool of candidates with each of our networks that we build up over the years of a good diverse data pool that we have with Ray & Associates. And so as you go through some of these things here, you'll highlight all the keys, and then I'll get into each one of them a little bit more in depth, which is the second slide packet that you have. So just take a minute, please, and review those. Let me go into a little bit more detail now about the search processes if you select Ray & Associates and what we bring to the table in our experience of over 44 years. We have been in this business longer than any other firm, like I mentioned, 44 years. And we have, like I mentioned, 160 associates that are active and work throughout the United States. We have a very extensive database that's already established in place, and then we work with the school boards to identify what you want, particularly in what you want to select for advertising in the search process. I mentioned the diversity of our associates. I've done searches in North Dakota, South Dakota, here in Illinois, Florida, et cetera. And I mentioned already that 40% of our associates that work with the school boards are of diversity. Your selection of Ray and Associates will mean that Bob and I will be assigned to your team to work with you as you go through this process, and we may have one or two other associates join us. Ray and Associates averages about 70 candidates for each search, which is a very high number for search firms. I've been on searches where we've had as many as 115 or 120 candidates. And so we help you identify those candidates, we help you advertise to seek those candidates in their applications, and then we work through the process with you in building that pool of candidates. So let me talk briefly about the process. We start with board input and feedback from you on what you're looking for in your superintendent. We develop that into community engagement and community focus groups so we get feedback from community members. I've done community forums in different states to get that feedback from community members. We also do it online. Many community members don't have time to come to those sessions, so they can go online and go in and put their feedback on what they think they're looking for in their superintendent profile. And we also do it in multiple languages as well, so it's available to the school district on that. We develop that profile. We go into the recruiting process. I mentioned we have a substantive data pool already. I know part of this process is an interim. We have candidates in the data pool already who have identified themselves as being interested in interim opportunities and come from all locations in the United States. And then we get into building that candidate pool. And then once we build a candidate pool, we'll, as associate team, along with our leadership in Cedar Rapids, we'll review and do a matrix profile of each one of those candidates. And then from that matrix profile, we'll narrow that pool down, which is an average of 70, sometimes is 100, 115 candidates. We'll get that down to 8 to 12 candidates, whichever you decide, because this is your process and we work collaboratively with you. So if you decide you want 12 candidates for us to come back and present to the board, then we'll have 12. If you want 8, that's fine too. But when we come back and present them, we present their profile, their resumes, their credentials. We also present a 3-minute video that's part of the process. So you'll get to actually see the candidate and hear from the candidate. And then we'll come back with that 8 to 12 candidates, and you'll get the chance and opportunity to select those that you want to interview and the number that you want to interview. It's 5, 3, or even 8. That's up to you to decide, and whether you want to do 2 rounds of interviews as well and get it down to 3 or 5 finalists. We come back and help facilitate the second round of interviews. So I'd like to highlight, in looking into slides, your board input is very critical. We'll do interviews of each individual board member to get your perception or your feedback and input of what you particularly want as a school board member in the selection and profile of that school superintendent. Then we'll do those stakeholder reach outs to that and do engagement sessions. I did one search up in North Dakota, and we had several community forums. They were pretty well attended, and we went through this process to get that feedback to help build that profile. Then all that data is put together, and we come back to you and present to you what that profile result is. And then we'll help you also identify the timelines of the search and the compensation all throughout the process and walk you through the process at each step. But again, this is your process, it's your selection. We're just here to help facilitate that. So let me talk a minute about the stakeholder survey and the questions that we ask from each of you. It's basically based upon 33 characteristics. And it's research-based, and it's all to help focus down what particularly the strengths are in the weakness, or whatever weaknesses you anticipate in any individual, what you're looking for to weigh in that process in selecting your superintendent. And we tally up your results from your interview, like I mentioned, and the focus groups that we engage to, and we put together open forums to get that feedback and information. We post it online so you and as a school district can publish your superintendent search timelines and milestones and what the public can access, and they can go in there and do these surveys, like I mentioned, in different languages. So we have a pretty robust website that we use for advertising. We get about 3,500 hits a month on ours. I know that when I was a candidate for superintendent, I regularly got posted opportunities with Ray & Associate for superintendent positions throughout the United States. We end up getting about 4 to 5 the number of applicants than any other search firm. And we allow you to work with us to decide how you want to advertise and where to advertise in building a diverse group of candidates from that pool that we mentioned. So part of the process as well is we help do very thorough background searches so you have no surprises as a school board. We do criminal background checks, financial background checks, internet checks. We go on Google and do searches there so that we can make sure that the candidates that are presented to you, we can present any kind of concerns you may have around that with your selection of that. We also make sure that we do criminal background checks and check for litigation, anything that might happen during the process of a career, so that in the end there's no surprises to you in that process of your selection that might come back after the fact of a candidate. I mentioned already the videos. We started doing videos about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've had to do them on the interviews. I found them to be extremely effective. It's a great way for you as a school board to put a face to a file and to get some level of understanding of the candidate and how they answer and respond to those questions. And you help shape some of those questions that we ask them to do on these video interviews. So at the conclusion of the selection process and you picked your candidate, we will help you in the contractual agreement process. We'll also guarantee 2 years the superintendent in place. If something were to happen short of 2 years, we'll come back and do your search at no cost. And we also do what's called a board self-assessment. The assessment is around how was the process, what would you change, what could we do better, what you're comfortable with, and basically to help get feedback and give you an opportunity to share your feelings in the process. And then last, we can help build that leadership team, whether you decide to do other searches, et cetera, with your new superintendent, or just help the superintendent come on board and build a leadership team in place. So that pretty much summarizes the process. I've highlighted why we, as Ray & Associates, are different from other search firms and the value added, what we bring to the table. And I try to keep it under 10 minutes. So what are your questions?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. So the first question is, being a school district in a community that is highly focused on issues of racial equity, can you tell us what process you have in place to identify candidates who will be able to meet the needs of a racially and culturally diverse community? In your response, can you specifically address, if we select your firm, what have your consultants done to deepen their own understanding of racial and cultural differences? And how do you determine a candidate's racial consciousness and their ability to understand issues of diversity and cultural differences?
Okay, so part of that is in the candidate pool. And so where we draw candidates from, obviously we work with the school board to identify advertising and other sources. There are a myriad of different opportunities to advertise with minority organizations in education to draw diversity from those. On your one slide there in your lengthy packet, you see some of those organizations that we work with to make sure that we're building a candidate pool of diversity. And then, of course, we have great diversity in our associates, which they tap into our network of educators. We've all been in education. We all know great people, and we all reach out to them. In fact, we get emails regularly as associates to say, this position is posted. These are the qualities and profile that the school district's looking for. Can you reach out to people that you know that would fit that profile and be competitive as a candidate? And then when you build that profile, you build a lot of that in there, of what you just mentioned, into building the advertisement, the qualities that you're looking for in leadership and diversity and equity experience. And how that happens is through that profile building, and then you're inclusive in there around that. Bob, do you want to add something?
Yeah, not only do we work closely with AASA or the National School Boards Association, but we also work very closely with the National Alliance of Black School Educators, as well as the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. So we work very closely with them to help us diversify our candidate pool.
I think obviously it's a great question, but if I may, from personal experience, I did a presentation in a small city up in South Dakota, and the board chair there asked the question, how do we make sure that we get candidates that would be happy living where we are in the middle of nowhere and would be content to stay here long-term? And we actually delivered on that around and have in the past delivered on meeting those requirements, because you got to build it into profile, you got to build it on where you're drawing and marketing and advertising from, so you get a pool of candidates around what you just stated.
So I just want to go a little further with that question. It's when we talk about racial equity, we are thinking about it through the lens of racial justice. And I want to draw in on the part of Sunny's question about racial consciousness. It's not, we're not simply looking for folks who identify from marginalized backgrounds. We're not looking for just a demographic. We're also looking for a perspective regarding the role of education. So from that lens, what are some of the strategies that you all have employed in order to assess the racial consciousness of an individual and how they bring that to racial equity, a lens of racial equity in education?
I think once 8, 10, 12 finalists or semifinalists are determined through a very thorough background check of their current employer, their past employers, to see what it is that they have done to foster this diversity, this inclusion, and so on and so forth. And we can get a pretty good handle on what they've managed to accomplish in their respective districts prior to coming here. As you say, it's more than just showing up. It's what they have done. How do they really support, encourage, endorse diversity? And have they done it? And how have they done it in their respective school districts? We can find that out by very thorough background checks. Sometimes we go and make a site visit and talk to people, the man on the street. You go in and have a cup of coffee, or you go to the local Chamber of Commerce office and say, I'm thinking about moving here, tell me about the schools. And that gives you a good insight into what these candidates can bring to the table.
So if I might add, having done searches as a superintendent candidate with Ray and Associates, and they're really only one of 2 firms that I ever worked with, because I firmly believed in their ethics and their values. You did your application. You built your application around what the profile of the school district was looking for. Do I fit these qualities and values? Do I fit the profile that the school district built around? Do I have the expertise in the areas that they're looking for in leadership in their superintendent around some of the issues that you mentioned and other issues as well? So that's built into the profile. Then that's built into the initial interview. We do interviews of candidates, and we get a series of questions, and we look for candidates that have the experience or the qualities that you just mentioned and others that you build in your profile, so that we're screening out candidates that don't meet that. And then those candidates build into a pool where we get them down to a smaller pool, and we analyze their experience, their strategies, where they worked, what they've accomplished, and we get that down to 8 or 12 qualified candidates around the profile and the skills and the experience and the expertise that they bring that meets and matches your school district.
Can I ask a question? In 2006, your firm represented District 202, the high school of this community. Were there any, in the search for their superintendent, are there any lessons learned or information gleaned from that experience 13 years ago, that has you coming back to Evanston feeling like you have a strategy for how to engage the community a second time?
Well, I've been with them 3 years, so I know we built this board assessment analysis after the fact to get that kind of feedback. How did we do? Did we meet your requirements? Did we find enough candidates with the expertise and strategies you were looking for? So that's something relatively new within the last year. I haven't been with them long enough to answer that specific question, but we can certainly get you an answer.
I cannot address what may or may not have happened in 2006, so as Rick has indicated, I'm sure that we could, whatever lessons were learned, I'm sure we have incorporated. As we go through this process with a lot of boards, we are also learners, and we take from you all things that we can always do better, and we try to incorporate them. And we try to be as flexible as we possibly can. It's your search. It's the most important job you're going to do as a Board of Education. And you're going to get tired of hearing that, but it is. And it's your choice, it's your selection and process, and we're here to help guide and put you in the right direction.
Thank you.
I also know that the firm in the summer does small, kind of almost like retreats to get that kind of feedback and strategies back to address anything that's been learned from that previous year in searches, and gather that up and put it into the search process and moving forward.
So in one of your slides, you talk about your proven consensus building strategies for getting stakeholder input. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more, specifically in a community like ours that has diverse and sometimes often divergent opinions. How do you set up stakeholder engagement sessions to be productive? What format do you recommend by stakeholder group, and what questions or process do you use to elicit input?
So from my experience with Ray & Associates, we build that consensus with the Board of Education in the interviews, in the profile building, and then you help us identify the focus groups and the meetings and locations, and we come out and we do presentations on the selection process and some of the feedback that we're getting on what the profile is looking like, and then the online survey input, as well as the input that we gather at those meetings, helps us move forward with building that.
We try to keep the meetings civil in case you may have some districts who have issues, and you may, depending upon who the stakeholders might be, you may have people who are single issue individuals, but we try to keep things civil and professional and try to bring things to a closure through a consensus. Not everybody's always going to agree. Board members don't always agree on things at times, but as a person said at one time, the supreme wisdom of a school board is a 4-3 vote. So we try to be as professional as we possibly can in dealing with stakeholders, because we understand they come to the table and they have their concerns, they have their issues, whatever they may be, and so we try to respectfully take those issues and then communicate those to you.
From my experience, you kind of want to encourage it to be a feedback session. And this is to get good collaborative and good community feedback so that they're inclusive in the process. Obviously, it's your job as a school board to make the selection representing the community, but you send that message out that this is really about their opportunity to express what their concerns are and issues are and what needs to be transcended into those candidates that you're looking for with those qualities and expertise.
Okay, well, I think if there aren't any other questions, the final question that I have is what other executive searches are you committed to during this time frame?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
What other executive searches are you committed to during this time frame?
I put a list in there of ones that we've done in the past. Our website is very current with all the positions that are posted on there, and it obviously goes beyond superintendent, but down to principal and assistant superintendents, et cetera. We do an extensive amount of searches So I know I look at it frequently. I think there are probably about 6 or 8 active searches going on right now, and we even post who was selected for the job and put it on our website and say congratulations, et cetera. So the short answer is I don't know specifically which ones are still active. I do check it, and we've done them all over the United States in large cities, urban districts, rural, suburban areas, et cetera. But beyond that, right now I think we have about 6 or 8 active searches.
I think to further answer your question, Rick and I would be totally committed to doing the search. As far as any other searches, the only search that I can think of where I may be on the periphery is Indian Prairie. In my local district, they're doing a search. They're not using a firm. They're doing it themselves. And they've asked for some advice, et cetera. But we make a commitment to you and your district to work with you to complete the search.
I've never been on more than one search at a time.
I'm just curious, for focus groups, do you all have any bilingual associates that can support doing community engagement in languages other than English?
Well, we have our central office staff that helps facilitate, works with your staff, which reduces the burden and amount of time that they have to put in that. As far as the community engagement sessions, you pretty much do the invitation of it, the location and the site, and we'll do as much as we can to help facilitate that.
But if we need an interpreter, if that's what you're referring to, we might ask for your suggestions or whatever, but if we need to have someone to help us do the stakeholders meeting, we will certainly secure that, and hopefully with, you may have someone who's local that can help us, but we would certainly meet that and try not to exclude anybody that has difficulty in being a member of the stakeholders.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. We are going to be deliberating and making a decision tonight, so we will let you know. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess anybody want to kick off any discussion, thoughts?
I just want to say to my colleagues up here and anybody in YouTube land, for the sake of transparency, this is the biggest part of board work that overlaps with my professional life. I have worked with all of these firms as a candidate, as a stakeholder engagement person professionally, receiving new administrators. And I just want to make sure that you know that I had a lot of relationships talking in front of us today, and that's just something that you should just know as we go into the next phase. It doesn't influence my decision-making. There's plenty of overlap. I've worked positively with all of those firms, but I've worked positively with all those firms. I just want to make sure that I disclose to you that I have relationships within all those firms personally and professionally.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have anything just to consider for the purpose of trying to make a decision to select a firm?
I would like to offer my initial opinion to the presentation and the certainly as we look at a firm that's going to be required to put some things in writing to community members. I thought that Ray and Associates didn't present things to us in a way that I would want to reflect out to the community. Just the paperwork part, I thought that some of the questions that you asked, both in terms of their commitment to us as a search firm, they didn't seem sure on their own timeframes, as well as the questions around how do they attract a candidate pool that is diverse or, have the leadership capabilities to lead a community like ours, I thought was underwhelming compared to the other answers that we received.
Thank you. Any other initial feedback?
For me, I took a couple of notes down, but one of the things that stood out to me while it was on the higher side expense-wise, I do appreciate that BWP had a cap on how much we would be spending, which included a 2-year, agreement to help us if it didn't work out. Additionally, I was very drawn by the mentoring piece that they would provide the candidate, so I think that that's an added plus. So in taking all the costs into consideration, I think for me, knowing what the bottom line is an added draw for me. And I will say that having somebody from the community is extremely valuable for me to know that somebody who is presented it in a very eager way is an added draw to me, and that they seem to be the most enthusiastic, as well as just very well prepared in terms of knowing our district and what they hope to provide as a service to us was appealing to me.
Thank you.
I'll have to agree with Rebecca. I think the BWP proposal really brings in some of the elements that I really look for in leadership. And again, being somebody that's newer to this community, right, who wasn't raised, and having somebody with the history as an educator, having done different roles and having the relationships established across the different agencies and institutions that Evanston has, I think, again, BWP gave a very strong presentation. And if they can turn that experience and those relationships and leverage those relationships in this superintendent search, I would be happy to, go with this particular firm.
Candace?
I would say I think of the 4 firms, the 2 that I was most impressed with were BWP and HYA. I agree with what's been said about the kind of personal perspective of the folks from BWP, but also offering different options if that's, so I respect that they thought, that can be a plus. I think in my mind it's a plus, but I can understand how it could be perceived as a conflict of interest and interested enough in the business to provide some different scenarios under which we could operate, so appreciated that. I think HYA also has, a track record in this district and has provided good service in the past. So for me, I would focus my deliberation on among those 2, and I would probably be satisfied with either, but would lean towards BWP because of the understanding of the community and as you said, like the obvious eagerness and interest and enthusiasm about doing this search and it being a very focused search. And I think that both came both from HYA and BWP, but even more so for them. So
I agree about focusing on those 2, because I think they stood out in the presentations. One of the things that I thought was interesting, just in the details of the advertising packages between HYA and BWP, HYA actually listed advertising to HBCUs or to other administrative organizations for Black and Latino organizations separately, where I felt like it was more embedded within BWP. It was assumed, and just a nuanced thing that stood out to me.
it is harder in their proposal though in HYA to understand what the all-in costs potentially could be. So, and you know, I'm sure we could figure it out if we went through it in a lot of detail, but it's more challenging to understand after, you know, if you look at it from an all-in perspective.
Right. Can I ask Suni, these packets, they all had references. Have we done any reference checks yet?
Not yet.
Okay. So that's we may come out of here with a leader and then we still have to check in on a couple?
Yeah, that's one approach that we could take, yes.
So I agree with distilling our conversation to BWP and HYA. I do think that those were the stronger presentations as well. One of the things that I did appreciate was the response from HYA about my question about how to assess racial consciousness. That she specifically mentioned talking about student discipline and thinking about what are the other ways that one's beliefs about racial equity may come up in their focus or in their professional practice. And it aligned well with, I think, our desires to think differently about discipline for children. And I thought that was one of the more thoughtful answers to that question that we received. And I noticed from a lot of the other firms a focus on simply having a diverse demographic in terms of the applicant pool, as opposed to having specific beliefs about equity or justice. So that's my initial feedback. I did appreciate the options that BWP provided, but also the local perspective that would be the potential on the team, and in investment in being responsive to what our needs are.
So I agree with focusing on HYA and BWP as well. Their presentation stood out. And I appreciate what you just said. I would just like to put out there that I don't really think any of the firms answered the question about how to approach, we're trying to lead them, like how do they approach the search using a racial lens? And frankly, I don't think any of them answered that particularly well. But I do think the HYA answer was at least a little bit more nuanced than any of the others. So I appreciated that. But I do think that BWP, I think having somebody who already knows the community to a certain degree and has some relationships already and some understanding of what our community's needs are, and not necessarily having to start from scratch on that, would be helpful. So I think I would be happy with either of them, but I feel like in my mind I'm leaning towards BWP for that reason. So, on the agenda, I had hoped that we could select the firm today because obviously, otherwise we'd have to come back again to be able to do that, and before we can move on to doing both the interim and then thinking about the long-term search. I don't know, do people feel prepared to do that, or do they want to go back and do some of the reference checks? I mean, understanding that these are the four firms that.
They're the only four. They're the only firms.
They're the only firms that do this
in
work.
This area.
In this area.
And they all provided reference letters. I would say calling other board leaders who provided references might be useful if we can't decide, to ask what the nuance of working with the firm was like, to see if there's something that's a better fit.
Right.
Well, would we also feel comfortable saying that we are wanting to make a selection pending no negative reference checks?
Right.
Presuming that no one says absolutely not, that was horrible.
Right, which I would be surprised if any of the references they provided.
That would be shocking.
That would be shocking, but it's, I guess it's a possibility. So how do
you feel comfortable with that?
Yes.
I've heard leanings towards BWP, and I'm seeing head nods. Does anybody have an argument to make for HYA, because that seemed to be the other one that there was some leaning towards. Would anybody feel strongly about considering HYA instead?
Can I say something about if we're going to go with BWP?
Mhm.
I feel like it's very important that we think about how the racial equity impact assessment tool be a part of this process. And given its role for our board, think about how we ask whichever firm we work with, get familiar with that tool, and think about how they can become well-versed in it, and that we think about long-term about how we will use the tool in order to inform the decisions that we make along the way here.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree, and given, as Suni pointed out, the lacking answers that they gave regarding, racial consciousness, it behooves us to ensure that is a tool that helps them get to that point in regards to acknowledging and searching for racial consciousness within the search process as well as from candidates.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. If we are looking towards BWP, I would want us to think, they did provide the options, which I thought was thoughtful and was helpful. Do we have, how do people feel about the three options? And I guess it's really the role of Dr. Hill on our team would be the question. I feel like it would be, my opinion is that we should probably use her in some capacity because she does have some deep connection to the district and to the community. So to have her not be a part of the team seems like it would be a mistake, but I can be swayed on what that role should be, and I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that.
I think it would be a lost opportunity to not engage her in the lead role. I circled option one as they were presenting because that seemed to be the model that they were presenting with.
Right.
With her centered and lead, I think she brings a strong education voice. She also brings a strong Evanstonian voice to the process. And I think if she is willing, and they presented that as an option, if she is willing to put herself and her local capital into this process, I think that says a lot about her personally, but also about the firm and, their hopes and dreams for the process. And I think that would be a lost opportunity if we didn't engage them in that way.
And I don't think that, I would not want to artificially suppress her voice. I think if we're going to go with them, then we should trust the process and trust the structure that they typically work with. And I don't know Dr. Hill personally, but I would feel comfortable with option one. It seemed like the authentic manner in which they operate as a team.
She also did say that this would be the only project that she's working on, and none of the other presenters were able to say that. And I think to hear her and her enthusiasm and know that she's pretty much exclusively working with us, I don't know if she will eventually be the mentor or provide that service, but I think to know that she is the lead and would be able to dedicate that time and make herself available. Her reference to cutting down on expenses and really honoring, her expenses, I think, was an added draw. And again, I think for HWA there, in the packet, there's all these added packages. And so I'm really leery of getting into something that I don't know what the final, the bottom line is going to be. And I think I feel really comfortable with their presentation that this is the max on what you're gonna spend. So that I would definitely want her to be part of the process. So either option, I would be comfortable with option one, but also would, for the sake of, providing any hesitation for conflict of interest, option two would also be considered.
Thoughts, Candace or Sergio?
I would say the same thing as Joey did. If we're going to go with BWP, it seems like it would be remiss not to take advantage of Dr. Hill's expertise and her local focus. And I've been trying to sit here and think what the downside of that would be, and I can't actually think of anything. I mean, they were transparent in serving it up. I'm sure she'll find that her historical perspective, some of which has changed, right, in the district of today versus 10, 15 years ago. I think it would be an extreme advantage from a mentoring standpoint, especially we don't know if the person we select will be from the community or outside of the community, and if in fact they would be outside the community, to have someone who does have deep roots in the community to serve as a mentor in that first year, I think would be extremely beneficial if that continues to be part of it. And it's not at an extra cost to us, which is also a plus. So I would go with option one, but I could be missing something in what the downside could possibly be. But to me, it seems like it would be an advantage more than a disadvantage.
I genuinely think that any conflict of interest that is brought up out of option one is a circumstance that I could live with as a possible downside. Like Rebecca mentioned the HYA packet, there's possible options that go beyond. The fact that we got a packet that offers consultation at a fee beyond the search process makes me leery that they might ask us to hire a candidate that wants that and then brings us back a pitch to say we'd like some consultation from this group. I'd rather have a more intensive search for the talent and skills that are necessary to do the job without the need for as much of that consultancy, right? We're looking for that kind of a leader. We're a big enough district where we can expect that. And I think that was more of what I felt from BWP.
And so for me, it's three things, right? It's this the lived experience that Dr. Hill has, right? I think that's something that we talk a lot about in equity work, is that we want to make sure that the folks whose voices have been suppressed or been ignored are actually at the head, and that we're listening to them. So that to me is critical. The connections and that she has through her sororities, HBCUs. That international experience, I mean, I think that is very valuable as we really need to revisit American education and the way we practice it. And God, I had a third thing, but can't remember it now. But the bottom line is 9 o'clock, and I do. But I really do see again that it is a I would go with option one, possibly option two, if there's any. Again, I can't, like Candace, I can't see the negatives. I just, again, I think about her and having seen and lived through the history as an educator here in District 65 as a curriculum instruction assistant superintendent, right? And we have Stacy, right? Like how incredible, right? To be able to have those folks talk about, okay, well, what was it like back in 2000 when you were here in my position, and how is it now? And that interaction to me is just, it's incredible, and us learning from history in order to move forward in a positive way towards bettering outcomes for our kids and all our kids in Evanston.
So I agree. I mean, I think option one makes the most sense, and to take advantage of Dr. Hill's connections and roots in the community. I think, obviously, whatever we go with, I don't think we're going to be so set to it that if we feel as we're going along that there are some conflicts that we don't want to live with, that we couldn't ask her to take more of a back role while the others step up. So I think I would be comfortable saying, let's do it, start out this way, and then, we can keep things fluid and transparent as we go along. So I think I am hearing that we can vote on BWP, and that I will go through the references and just do a check this week to make sure that nothing comes out that we would be concerning to us. And then obviously this is all contingent upon having, the written agreement and whatnot in place. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so with that then, Sergio, do you want to,
Sure.
putting in BWP and Associates in the blanks?
I move that the board engage BWP and Associates to provide consulting search services for candidates qualified to serve as an interim superintendent and to serve as a permanent superintendent to the school district, subject to the board entering into a written agreement with BWP and Associates.
Second.
Mendoza,
Yes.
Halpern,
Yes.
Tanya Vudi,
Yes.
Hernandez,
Yes.
Cho,
Yes.
Cartha.
Yes. And with that, do we have anybody signed up for? I guess, yeah, we could just ask, does anybody wish to speak during the public comment period? Please? What's that? Yes. We voted for a BWP and Associates. Okay, well, that being the case, I will adjourn this meeting at 9:01 p.m. Thank you.